Okay, good morning, everyone again. I am Luis Cueva Parra. I will be chair of this tutorial session. And welcome to the second day of the 2022 Mini Gateways Conference. This is one of the today's tutorials. The tutorial's title is an overview of the Apache Airavata software stack for science gateway. The authors and conductors of this tutorial are Suresh and his team from the Cyber Infrastructure Integration Research Center at Indiana University. Suresh, please go ahead.
Okay, we'll get started. Again, thank you all for taking the time. So what's our hope is we have a little bit of a loaded agenda, but what we will want to give you is we will focus on and emphasize on what you can take home. Then what you can absorb in addition to what you can absorb in the next 90 minutes about Apache Airavata. So again, the project is a top-level Apache Software Foundation project, an open source Apache Airavata. But the organizers here, we are doing this tutorial, and the primary contributors to this open source project are from the Cyber Infrastructure Integration Research Center. We are part of the Pervasive Technology Institute at Indiana University. And again, please click this link. It's a short one. Hopefully, it's on the chat too. s.apache.org/minigateways22. You'll have this on the chat. We will have some tutorial instructions and hopefully some take-home documentation there. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge and both give acknowledgements and thanks to our funding agencies. Again, this is not a comprehensive. I'm sure I missed quite a few and not updated this list. With the Apache Airavata, our contributions from Indiana University to the Apache Airavata projects have been made possible through direct and indirect awards, quite a bit of award from the National Science Foundation and from the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure and other science directorates who help us contribute to this software, and the NASA AIST and access programs, and as well as a few NIH awards. The current active one being from the development of an Alzheimer's disease discovery center at Indiana University, but we constantly get indirect funding to support this from various other collaborators who lead these grants, and thankfully write us into their grants. So we have a team of instructors, and also they wanted to briefly acknowledge and point to some of those instructors, team members who are also on the call, who will help as needed. Again, so we'll have a small group here. So please keep it interactive and feel free to interrupt us anytime as we go. So briefly introducing our team, collectively, we are cyber infrastructure practitioners, but many of us come from various science backgrounds, like Marlon, for example, our center director is a physics background, few physicists, and Sudhakar, Pamidighantam, here you will see on the slide. Here, is a chemist by training and also runs and operates a science and engineering gateway with prominent chemistry applications, and collaborates with other material science researchers and so on. And many of us here provide extended scientific consultations through the EXCEED program and the Science Gateway Community Institute. In that capacity, we're fortunate to work with scientists across the country from various disciplines. So that informs us both the use cases and as well as motivates us with inspiring problems to solve and contribute them back into the Airavata. And for example, Marcus, Dimuthu, John, Isuru, and all, primarily are the software engineers. And we constantly engage students. As an Apache project, we engage Google Summer of Code students, and we get quite a bit of contributions to the Google Summer of Code programs, from students across the world. And fortunately also hire some of them, and some students who contributed and benefit from these inspiring science use cases also have done gone into the tech industry and so on and done good for themselves. And Marlon and I also co-teach a graduate level computer science course at Indiana University, which also have constantly engaged some of them as research assistants and graduate assistants, and also make contributions to the course as well. So in a nutshell, again, there's a lot of work from a lot of people. I'm being the marketing, probably a salesperson today, but my goal is to just give you a big, as 90 minutes is a short one for a very hands-on tutorial. So instead, I will be doing a little bit of an overview of the landscape and what has been in Airavata, and which funded in the last 20 years in various National Science Foundation funded projects, primarily what we've been done and how we've been applying to various science use cases. That's a big view I will provide. So again, after introduction of this Airavata stack from high level, we'll point to some tutorials. We would welcome anyone. So we have some of our colleagues on the call. So we welcome you to keep trying and following along and ask us questions. But given the time limit, and would consider this as a trailer to a longer tutorial we will be doing at the PERC conference, if you are planning there to attend there. So at PERC 22, we'll have a half a day tutorial. It will take you a little more hands-on and more in-depth. But our goal for today is have enough pointers so you can take along and then follow at your own pace, and also reach us out if you have any questions. So we'll do a little bit of a mix of hands-on and a talking and pointing, so that to give you to set the right expectations. And then I'll explore. I'll introduce a little bit of this. You'll see a little of everything here, from data to security, and so a little bit of everything here. So, and I'll explain that why in a minute. Then I'll take pauses as much, so feel free to interrupt too. But if I'm not, but I'll also be taking pauses in between topics. So feel free to ask any questions. Again, if we step back and think about it, if we really reflect upon, what our group has been doing and what how Apache Airavata has evolved in the last 10, 15 years. So what we see is if we were to summarize with one common problem, we kind of get motivated by the research and a typical research workflow, which is the opposite of the NSF vision, which puts it out for a continuum at all levels, from resources to applications to people. So we see, we still see, in spite of a lot of efforts, data, compute, applications, expertise is fragmented across the place. And that, typically overwhelms researchers. They have to deal with computational workflows at various places, integrate resources at large scale, deal with data and manage this data at all at various places, from their local machines to the national infrastructure, and as well as same with having to get overwhelmed with dealing with applications at various scales. So if we were to again emphasize, so what we've been doing with Airavata is with this goal, what motivates us from that busy diagram is, okay, how can we bridge this? On one end we see science pushing it extreme, and having diverse science use cases, multidisciplinary problems, the scalable problems to address, and on the other end we see more and more computational infrastructure available for researchers, from the local infrastructure, from laptops to the desktop infrastructure, getting more and more powerful to do a decent amount of work. A lot of input science happens there, and that need to be seamlessly transitioned and and worked alongside with the national infrastructure. And then the emerging disruptive technologies, from an increasing use of machine learning, deep learning, and so on one hand, they provide good opportunities, and we are in a good state with doing more science. On the other hand, that puts puts a burden on the researcher on how to integrate all of them. So what we try to look into Airavata is how can we integrate that, or what can Airavata play a role in smoothing this, and at the same time have this pluggable infrastructure, both on the computational side, an ability to work with more and more diverse resources there, and on the science side, how can we help build different scientific interfaces, from researcher interfaces using Jupyter hubs to web-based science gateways to and lots of other infrastructure in between. How can we enable all of that in a secure way is kind of like what Apache Airavata, if I were to describe from a 10,000 or 15,000 foot view, that would be that key theme what we work on. So putting it into the standard layered figure. So what Airavata is a gateway middleware here. So again, like in that picture, so it's a bunch of hosted software, open source software and services, which is what we will get a little bit hands-on and a lot of code pointers too in this middleware layer here. And then we will highlight some of the integrations it can enable to various scientific instruments or computational resources at campuses and national infrastructure. And then on the other end, how users can seamlessly use their institutional credentials. And for example, we kind of work with users at all scale, from the tier 1 universities to the MSIs and everything in between, where there is there are maybe abundant of resources in one certain universities, and other places where you need to work with limited computational infrastructure and take advantage of the national fabric here, and how we can some of the gateways we've been working with have been helping bridge this. So putting it in words again, what is Airavata? It's a middleware. It will help with workflow executions, data movements, metadata management, and build gateways. And Airavata can integrate with the university Exceed and resources that these gateways need. And so this is, I'll take a pause after that. So what we will do in these tutorials today is quick pointers, given we will not have time to cover all of it. We'll give you a preview. So Airavata has become a big ecosystem by itself, and it has these subcomponents, and each could be used, for instance. I will talk about some of these individually, and then walk through those tutorials, a Custos tutorial, which will give a preview on the security infrastructure, from users authentication to the resource authentication, and how do we do that. And Helix is an Apache project, initially championed by LinkedIn to run entire LinkedIn scale data centers to run their diverse workloads, from their data analytics workflows to web traffic to the classic social graphs and so on. So Helix is the underlying platform, which initially was developed internally for LinkedIn and open source, and now supports quite a bit of other industrial workloads as well. So Apache Airavata, initially started out having a homegrown, as with many research projects, building a big job submission, job management framework, and eventually, when we see projects like this, the Helix framework, we adopt those and run through the job management use cases through the Helix, and as part of the tutorial, we will see why and what kind of benefits we will get by adopting a large open source project. It will take some effort to integrate, but what's the payoff is what we'll look into. And from there, we look into the Django Portal framework, on which there are about 50 plus science gateways from different disciplines, from different levels of interactivity to variations in sophistication, from compute heavy to data heavy gateways are built on a common portal framework, and how we will look at that and what's available as part of the tutorial. We will see what you will get out of the box, what you can extend it for various scales projects. And then we will look into a little bit of the advanced use cases on the data side, data infrastructure of Airavata, on managing large-scale data transfers to metadata catalogs, cataloging systems, and so on. So let me pause here and also briefly take, if you have any questions or on expectations, we'll be happy to answer them. In the meanwhile, let me point to this. Again, the link you will see points to this wiki, the Airavata wiki, where the very first thing I'll request everyone to do is, if you can, please click on the Google Doc. Again, you can click from that link. I'll also paste it on the chat directly. If you don't mind, please put your name and your expectations. What would you like to know more? Because we would like to tailor the tutorial a little bit and discuss more of those. So please introduce yourself and then also help us do some collaborative note capturing here so that we can follow up, for example, if you have any particular topic and interested. So again, please go through this one link here where you will find some tutorial documentation as well as the notes link and like the introduction. So any questions, comments so far on what you will be expecting here and or anything, any feedback for us on what you would like to see more today? Rolling here and interrupt. Feel free to interrupt us either on chat or directly speak up, please. Okay, so what we will do is before we look into some of these, let me introduce some of these components from a very high level standpoint, and then we'll point to some tutorials. So the very first thing, if we recollect back this, from integrating from various infrastructures. So one project we've done, and initially it was done within Apache Airavata, where we had to build a lot of security, and now and then we collaborated with the Galaxy team and the Kopi and Isabdan from the Galaxy team is on the call. If you have any questions on how Galaxy uses custos or and how it motivates quite a bit of federated authentication use cases and secrets management. So with Galaxy and CA Logon out of the project led by Jim Basney and team out of University of Illinois and CSA, we've come together, the Apache Airavata team, the Galaxy team, and the CA Logon team, and we proposed on with NSF CC award support. What we have developed is a standalone project, an all-inclusive science gateway security components, to do the federated authentication, fine-grained authorization using groups, roles, and so on, and to manage users, groups, and secret management, and more importantly, also how to controlly share data, application, or resources. Essentially, how can we apply these fine-grained authorizations to various digital artifacts? That could be simple application, or you can think about from cyber infrastructure perspective of, okay, if I am from IU, I need to be saying, if I am doing my computing, I need to see both the resources I am available for me at my campus at the level of international infrastructure. How can we do those kind of controls too? I want to share data with my research project or with my advisor first, and then the research group, and then open it up to public and so on. So how can we apply all of those authorizations to the fine-grained aspects is what the Custos project is. And as we have done within the other Apache modules as well, Custos builds on well-known open source projects for individual components. Of course, it leverages CI logon infrastructure heavily for all the in-common to educate on all the federation security to bridge the federations. And as we'll be doing the tutorials, you will be touching some of these points, and you will be brokered through some of these services. And then, for the identity management for users, group user management, and so on, we use Keycloak, an open source project, initially championed by Red Hat, and then a widely used open source project. And then for secret management to store various resource credentials, the Custos builds on an open source tool called Vault, mainly championed by the HashiCorp. So HashiCorp Vault is also a kind of a well-known, now widely used open source project for the secret management. So the Custos essentially combines all of this, the various aspects of whether you use Keycloak and integrate with CA logon seamlessly, or deploy HashiCorp Vault as a service, and then add in missing capabilities like group management and digital control sharing. It combines all of those and makes it available as an all-inclusive open source software. And then as part of the NSF award, we operate Custos as a service. So that's the Custos aspect. And I'll quickly preview this kind of I'm slowly zooming in from Airavata as a big ecosystem to individual subsystems. And then we'll be doing tutorials on some of these. So that's the custos part. And then a key portion of our hands-on activity we will do is, and we'll have the documentation already on the wiki. If you are going ahead, please jump ahead. If not, we'll also be walking through. So we'll be showing how to use execution services, like they have briefly mentioned Helix, and so how can we use Helix-based execution system to run jobs on Exceed or path-based infrastructure, and like the history contour, path being history contour on a recent student and collaboration contributions we've got from University of Nebraska. With a recent integration when we are trying to build up more and put more effort into it. And so how can we execute these jobs on various campus resources or Exceed or Path is kind of the point of this tutorial and pointers here. So in the meanwhile, I see a question on the Slack, on the chat. So how does custos compare to centralized permission system like SpiceDB? Let me also make sure if I have others also on the call, please feel to jump in. And responding to some of these. So the question, I think, we'll first of all, I'll let me switch that. That's a good question. Feel free to interrupt us, and we will dive more as I take these questions like this. So let me quickly share my switch my share and go back to the tutorial. So we will look into this tutorial documentation here. So you will see that, let's take this simple example. So what's custos goal? I'm trying to answer this by walking through and also giving you a preview of the tutorial, what we'll be doing. So if we look into the custos, again, first of all, there's extensive documentation. We try to point the link to, again, if you can click on the full paper list and feel free to look into some of those authors, some of the papers we try to constantly publish our work on all of this, or in this case, the custos paper will be here, the number 5 paper here, and again, feel free to look through the papers and then get more idea also. But I'll try to provide a very high-level answer on how it differs from other databases. I'll not particularly give a particular example, but I'll just let me describe this from a high-level standpoint. So what custos does is it will help to do in this case we will do a tutorial on how you can develop, as an example, an education portal. I'm trying to use this example to provide to give an idea to preview of what custos is, and hopefully that gets a point across. And if it's still not answered, I'll be happy to answer in detail. Let's take this scenario of you are developing, again, this is an outside of the Science Gateway use case, and this is intentional. So we want to demonstrate how, for example, custos could be used in Galaxy, and for Airavata and HathiTrust is kind of proven and is documented in the papers. But we also wanted to put a tutorial on how custos could be generally applicable to other infrastructure you may be developed. So we kind of, Isuru Ranawaka, who is on the call, can answer detailed question related to this, who is the primary developer also on the custos project. So he put together, along with other students, put together this use case. How can we do a learning management example? So that an use case here with a learning management infrastructure is, at first, let's say the university or a college will set up a course, and then the course is goes to this example of how you would go and create a tenant. So for a particular course or for a particular institution, before you even bootstrap, you would create a tenant within the custos ecosystem. And then, so you will say that this tenant has integrate with, say, a logon. I would like to support which are either all the institutions, or I will support for a certain institution and so on. You will do some kind of this meta configuration. Once you configure, then there is an administrator, and you take that configuration, and once the tenant is approved, you take that configuration and then give a basic roles. For example, first we'll give a role of a professor, and then a teaching assistant, and then student. So we'll take a professor role, and then we'll walk through. A professor has the ability to create assignments, share assignments, and so on. The teaching assistant will have some abilities to grade assignments, give feedback to students, and so on. And the students' permissions is is to view those assignments, submits assignments, and view the final grade. So if you take that use case, if we see here, there are different roles. These are multiple users in these roles. There is a professor, multiple TAs, multiple students. How do you create that roles and let them controlly access their digital artifacts here, and you can replace those assignments with your favorite data use cases or applications or other things and so on. So, so this is a simple example on how custos will enable integrate with federated authentication, as well as how you can enforce some authorization decision. So it's different in that from other implementations, that it's very generalized. It's you can take it and apply to your use cases. And then we have a couple of papers linked again from the link. If not, the second paper is not linked, we'll make sure that's linked as well. So we have one paper describing custos as I think we need to link one more paper here. We will do that. So the custos as a framework is described in one of our papers here. And then there is a framework, we have also a paper which describes how custos is integrated with the Galaxy, Hathi Trust Research Center, and so on. So those will hopefully give you an idea on, and we've done some work on comparing with the related efforts as well there in those papers. Please feel to look at them, and if you have any specific questions, we'll be happy to answer. So let me make sure that question is answered. Anthony, do you have more, or do you think that gives you an idea on where to go look for? Okay. Okay, thanks for that question. So getting us back onto the flow here again. So that's custos security, and then we will do a similar, as you saw already, we have pointers here, and time permitting, we will do some of this real time, some of these tutorials, but again, the documentation and those links will be active. And then feel free to follow along also. So this will also do this, get a preview on the execution services, how you can submit and monitor jobs. A key thing what we have learned over the years submitting these various diverse computing jobs on various infrastructure is we see a very high level abstract model in this, and whether it's a job on a HPC environment or a HTC or a cloud, the steps vary, but if we really look at it in an abstraction or a machine learning pipeline, for that matter, if we really look at it, we can break that down into a task graph, a directed acyclic graph, where it involves some environmental setup, and then we need to move data to the right infrastructure, and manage, submit a job and manage and monitor it, and once it's done, need to stage the data output back. So Airavata essentially builds on this kind of an abstraction, and then these implementations vary based on the infrastructure. For example, the batch queue machines, whether it's a Slurm or one of job managers might have a certain ways you can see an implementation of this graph. And then a Condor base has a different submission, and a cloud infrastructure has a different way. So let's say if you want to integrate with your favorite machine learning framework, that will have its own version of this graph. So the Airavata, the abstraction built upon the Apache Helix framework, does this at a higher level. And what we have done, what Airavata adds on top of this as a Helix graph is the computational specific things. For example, what we see is how we bridge the science and the infrastructure is, from a science perspective, a researcher wants to see, okay, I'm doing a computational experiment. I'll create and launch these jobs, and I might pick resources or I might request to auto schedule those, but I'll do this at a higher level. Help me break down those into a lower level task. And as we see, as we go through this and we take this scientist defined computational experiment, and then we create a computational processes still at a very abstract level, the previous graph I was mentioning, how you would pre-process or configure and run these input stages, and then go into a little bit very well-defined task based on the infrastructure. And those each task have their own life cycle of launching, running to completed. And then in the case of batch queues, they may be queued, or in case of interactive, they'll be differ. But in various sense, you kind of get into this detailed graph and then roll back. As those finish up, you roll back the status, and if the user is only interested at a various highest level, run me a Gaussian job, which is a kind of an example tutorial we will do today. Run me a Gaussian job, we just like keep the user at that level. And if the users who want to know more detail or the administrators, the system has this detailed view. And an additional aspect of this is breaking these down into manageable graphs helped us to apply fault tolerance at various cases. And so a key thing, for one thing we have learned moving to the Apache Software Foundation is Apache has this concept of mentors. Primarily from the community engagement standpoint, we also constantly learn technical tips from those. So in the research system ecosystem, we kind of aspire for being a best effort infrastructure. Some of these larger open source projects being used in the industry and so on has a different level of things. And how do we take it? It's not it takes 80 to 90% of the way the research grants allow us to support, but sustaining them and make them fault tolerant and highly available services is the last mile problem. How do we learn that is we've learned quite a bit from our fellow Apache projects, participating within that community, and contributing back. For example, we had good mentors, to name some, like Chris Matman, Ross Gardler, and others, from various companies and federal agencies, come and help us there. And we try to pay it forward to, for example, I mentored Apache Spark and others in their community formation days. So when we do that, so we learn from our mentors, and while we are mentoring, we learn from those projects and bring back them and apply back. So we've done some of those, and so it's like more than a job management. What we have done over time is how to do this right, so that you can do it in a highly available, reliable fashion. So this document, the figures again, this is a busy one, not to give the full view, but trying to switch gear here. So as we do the security, as the custodial security and execution management, and then we figure out how to plumb these various cyber infrastructure components. So now we need to take it to the scientists and provide science-centric views. So that's early on within Apache Airavata. We started it as a middleware project with just APIs and infrastructure. But what we have learned is we need to help, take as much as possible in the development of science gateway. So how can we roll up a framework, a portal framework on the extreme left here? So we initially started off with a PHP-based framework, and then moved to the more Python-based framework for the increasing use of Python, and as well as some of the capabilities we like in the Django framework. Marcus Christie, the lead portal architect, who has authored quite a bit of our tutorials here. We'll be happy to answer questions if you have, and you have contacts of all of them if you have curiosity in any of those decisions. So what the Django framework allows us is now we operate about 50 gateways. I'll show you, no two gateways are identical. Some are very data intensive, exposing a machine learning workload to a user, to the a recent one, which we had a recent demo in a recent workshop, how to do a gateway interacting with Condor, to how to do a dominant usage of the framework, and how to build gateways on Exceed infrastructure. So this is what we will do part of the tutorials today, and then I'll have pointers. So that's the Django portal. So I've covered 3 topics already. I'll take a pause shortly. So the security aspects, execution management, and the portal framework. And so we'll have some data management capabilities on moving data and so on, but talking a lot. So I'll give you guys work to your fingers and your keyboards and mouses. So let's take a small walkthrough of these tutorials, and then come back and I'll resume some of these high-level talks. So let's do some tutorials here, or have pointers walk through these tutorials on how what does Airavata provide out of the box? How can you build an exactly out of the box gateway, and how you can use it, and you can do some minimal customizations of look and feel improvements of branding, or do an extensive customizations like developing Django apps and integrating with the out-of-the-box infrastructure. So this is what the tutorials we will cover, in addition to the customers one I pointed out. So let me pause here, and before we start some hands-on activity. Any questions? Okay. Again, something occurs to you, feel free to again come back. So let's go back and follow this document, please. So that's the link you shared on the slide. It's if you didn't remember it, it's s.apache.org/mini-gateways22, and it's there on the chat as well as the Google Docs as well. So please go to this link. And so those of you who are interested in the Custos tutorial, so I'll try to first point out. I'll feel free to walk along, or these links will be active later on as well if you want to follow along. So the Custos, now I'm logging in, for instance, as a student. So feel free to click the links and use your institutional credentials to log in. And Isuru, who is administering this, he can give you a role here. So it will do my standard institutional two-factor authentication, enabled by, in this case, IU. So each institution may have their own setup here. And once I do my handshake here, sorry, kind of lost that link here, so I'll go back. I have my institutional login handshake. Yeah. So once I'm logged in, so what you will see here is, in this case, Isuru as an instructor created a course. So now only I have a student view. So a role controlled. So the federated authentication is identical. So I could log in as an instructor or a student. So I logged in this case as a student. So I'll have permissions to do again. To do just assignment submissions and so on. So and now I can for example, just for demonstration purpose, I'm just using my Google identity here, and I'll pretend I'll a different person with this identity logging in now as an instructor. So as an instructor, I'll have a view of creating assignments and with a different privileges. So it's a very simple one. But again, if you look through the papers for a very detailed discussion, sorry, I'll go back to the right paper here. I'll go to this here. So I'll encourage to put this into the context of, for example, take this experience paper here on how Custos is used. The simple example here for the hands-on portion is for a demonstration, how can you do two different roles and support federated authentication? For example, if you would, the Custos paper here provides a little bit detailed use case, for example, how it's enabling Galaxy to support federated authentication. The simple tutorial demonstrate that point. Or for HathiTrust to do at least higher level components on how it could be used to unify a couple of different identity management system. HathiTrust has, the paper describes, it has a couple of identity management system, one managed by HathiTrust, so the parent organization of the research center, and one managed by the Custos. How can we integrate? And then there are other more finer details on how you can do some authorization decision to, in this case, do a potential similar use case like the controlled unclassified use cases. For example, it's not exactly identical, but somewhat similar, where HathiTrust need to protect digital artifacts, which has copyright implications and so on, and enable research on those, and how Custos could be used to enable certain use cases like that is a discussion of the paper. Tutorials will give some idea, but since you are while you are on the wiki, you'll have other detailed tutorial as well and previous recordings, and some pointers to architecture and details as well. So between the papers and the tutorials, hopefully you will get an idea there. I'll be happy to do a step-by-step walkthrough if there is an interest. If not, I'll move to the next bit of how we can walk through an execution tutorial. Again, I'll put the disclaimer that we are not doing the standard hands-on tutorial recipes of, okay, we'll click a lot of buttons. So given we are overviewing a large project, kind of like, doing a little bit of hand wave here. So please bear with us, but we'll be happy to dig into details if you have questions. Okay. Hopefully you have those links. You can follow along. So some details here about the documentation. And if any of this is interesting, and if you want to bring, if you can think of, if you have a use case in mind and where you could be using Custos. Thanks, Julian, for joining in. So, for example, we did not yet add that into the tutorial documentation, but that's coming soon on how you would use Custos as a federated authentication for Jupyter Hubs, for instance. Julian Chastain is on the call. He's from Unidata, part of the UCAR organization, where we've been working with them, like, trying to help them on how to integrate this for using Jetstream, like, where Julian and his team operates a science gateway using Jupyter Hub on Jet and taking advantage of the Jetstream OpenStack cloud. So Custos is being integrated into that, and we'll have some documentation following that very soon. So that's the Custos tutorial. So I'll provide a little bit dive into, like, a request anyone following along, try to follow this tutorial, follow along with me, because this touches quite a few aspects of what we've been talking. So please click on the third one to log into Test Drive Django Portal. So what we are seeing here now is the out of the box, like, what I was mentioning, what comes out of when you check out Airavata code base and deploy this. So it's a portal. So again, reminding for a quick minute, pointing back to the slide here. So Airavata is the middleware. So again, I'll just set the context since we've been speaking, I've been talking about various things. So let me put this slide back up. Let me summarize what we've been talking so that I don't lose the audience on these various tutorials jumping between these topics. So Airavata is like essentially like, what we do is the what we call full stack cyber infrastructure. So I can take an infrastructure like Jetstream and then deploy virtual clusters on it. Like, as a brief description, I'll provide that, and how you can interact with OpenStack APIs and, like, build a batch queue Slurm, like a Slurm cluster using OpenHPC and some Ansible scripts, magic there. Or you can deploy a Kubernetes-like infrastructure. So Airavata has components on the bottom layer and how to build this, integrate with this infrastructure. And the execution services is my next tutorial, which is what I kind of jumped off. I'm back here to make sure I'm giving the context. So on the infrastructure where we can, like, run it on like Jetstream or other machines, like, or integrate with Condor and Exceed and so on here on the bottom. So we'll layer that on top of it with the Helix-based Airavata execution service framework. And built on top of it is some data movement and metadata management services, which I'll preview in the last. So the data infrastructure and Custos is what we looked at. And then, like, and then all of this will come and integrate with an out-of-the-box Django-based framework for developing user interfaces. So there is full stack of these pieces. So I'm trying to, the first one, Custos piece was a standalone, how you could use it standalone, and the tutorials were demonstrating that aspect. There are some pieces like this you could do standalone, like in the managed file transfers and so on. I'll talk about some of those. But, like, now the next tutorial, what we are doing is how you would combine all of that in a single gateway framework for deploying a gateway framework. So that's the next tutorial preview I'll provide. So what we will do here is switch to this tutorial. Share Zoom, yeah. So when you check out Airavata out of the box, you will get a deployment like this. And it has bareware. So when you check out, and you will have it's with Custos like security services integrated, it will support your institution login. So please go to testdrive.airavata.org from the link here and pick your institution. And if you cannot, for any reason, like, find your institution, you should be able to use Google or GitHub or Orchid and so on. But most likely, If your institution is supported by integrated with CA logon, you should see that here, there, or even many international institutions are listed there. If you click here and I'll pick IU, and since I just logged in, should take me back, but I think like we have an extra hop. Sorry if it happens to you also, or I haven't seen this before. Like please log in back. It's logging me to CA logon, but it's taking me to the CA logon page where the redirect is broken. Seems like we'll need to check that. So if it happens, please go to the URL again. Okay, Anthony is asking wiki link. I'll share that. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Eroma point sent the link, and also there's a Google Doc as well there. So if you go to the link, you'll find that. Okay. So Anthony, like if you would go here in the wiki, the very first, the number 3A is what we are looking at. So, or if you're like 3A is the test drive, link is what we are looking at. So we want to make sure we leave you with enough information, because there's kind of a movie trailer. We are giving a preview of a lot of stuff. So we have all those links, and if that's overwhelming, please ask us. So if you go to testdrive.airavata.org link, so that's an out-of-the-box gateway. And once you log in, you might see a lot of everything gray, and Eroma can, who's on the call, like is watching, and give you the permission so that you can run some jobs. So you'll also see as part of this link, two things. Directly, you can jump and grab these two input files, which we will use for Gaussian. Run the computation quantum chemistry model, you can run it, or you can go through some detailed documentation here also, which will show you how to do that. So please grab these input files also. So you're logging into this gateway and you're grabbing the input files here. We'll be using those input files in a minute. So once you download the input files, for example, I will pick a Gaussian example, and I will, let's say if you're using the N-pentane diol example, the one you downloaded. So if you drag that and drop that here and point to it, so it's a structure of the molecule, what essentially it describes, and the optimization needs to be done. So this is a Gaussian input file. So this is kind of early on, I was previewing how a researcher's workflow is. In this gateway scenario, we are skipping the input generation. There's a lot that happens. And there are other aspects in Airavata evolution. What we would like to integrate this is input generation. But in this aspect, we are assuming the scientists on their laptop generated this input file and uploading that input file. So this gateway is starting from after the input generation is done. And now we are helping on taking those input and running it on a computational infrastructure. So you could take this input file, for example, if you're familiar with Gaussian syntax, feel free to edit it, and so on. So once you provide an expansion, in this case, so we can run this, execute this job on two different things: an OpenStack cloud, here the Jetstream cloud on which the virtual cluster I briefly mentioned. You can deploy it on that, or the Expanse Exceed machine at University of UCSD's a cluster made available allocated through the Exceed infrastructure. So we can run this on Exceed, and I will click and save and launch. So I was briefly previewing when I was doing the experiment overview. As a scientist, you want to see what's my experiment, what my input, what my output is. So you'll not see a lot of details on how the job is constructed and so on. So here I provided an input file, and then as a user, I'm just seeing the high-level status. At an experiment level, it's executing. And if I go one level deeper, you will see it in submitted state. Anyone has any questions? If you're trying to do this, and if you're lost, feel free to put it on chat or stop us. We'll keep looking through some of these. So what you're seeing here is as a user view. As a researcher, in this case, what's out of the box, you would use Airavata to submit a job without any customizations is what we are seeing. So I would become I would go as an administrator. Here in this case, I have an administrative privileges. So just like the root on the machines and so on, as an administrator, I can look a little more. Thanks, Anthony, for submitting the job. Following along. So as an administrator, now I can see a little more. So I can see, okay, the user has selected and is running a Gaussian example on the expanse infrastructure. And then here is a constructed job script, because Airavata here, the whole point is not to do any magic here, but rather like, we transparently submit jobs over SSH, construct batch system jobs, and interact with the scheduler and so on. So it's essentially orchestrating a lot of simpler steps. In this case, there was based on users' Gaussian input and other resource selection, a scheduler script was generated and constructed. And then we will see that the whole process, as I was trying to show in that workflow, was broken down into multiple things. It was broken down into an environmental setup where a unique working directory was created on Expanse for the user, so that we are not stepping on to other executions within that unique. So, and then we'll see that unique working directory here in this line here. So it's created a unique working directory here. That's in bold here. I'll zoom in a little bit, just so that my text is visible. So we see that unique working directory is created, and the data is staged. The input file I provided for N-pentane diol molecule description is staged to the machine, and then the batch script is constructed and submitted, and then submitted to the local scheduler, and the local scheduler gave a job ID, which is what now Airavata is monitoring a couple of ways. It has a callback URL using an AMQP message bus, or it will check the emails also coming from the scheduler. So there is a little bit of a push and a pull approach here, so that we don't miss the statuses. And those jobs are being monitored, and then the workflow, the initial submission workflow is done when the workflow job is submitted. And then the job is being monitored by a different process within the execution framework. And once the job is done, submitted, and then a different post-processing workflow kicks in, where the job is staged back, to the gateway machine where the user can download. So if the job is fully done, so looks like this is in this case. So I can go back to my user dashboard and see, okay, it's actually running still. So we did not get any reservations on the resources. So, okay, it's active. So it should be done soon. So once the job is done, I should see the output files. So while that's happening, let me quickly go to a different interface. So what we do is for the users, for a computational, as we work with these applications like Gaussian, if there are parsers to parse out, because the users can just work with the input and output files, and a secondary workflow will be launched, a different Helix tag will be kicked in once the job is done to parse the data part. It will check for available data parsers, and in this case, if it detects a Gaussian parser, it will parse those data sets for much more details. So because from the user, typically they give a metadata very limited and cryptic in their science workflow context. So, but there are often use cases where we would like to see more. So, like to say, for example, I would like to see, this is an example, the experiment I gave, the name, probably I remembered on that time in 2020, but after all these, all the pandemic years, I don't remember now why I gave that name. So what I can remember is what the system remembered for me. So it checked, okay, I used a formula of O2, it has a number of atoms. All of these are came by after the Airavata infrastructure parser workflow kicked in, and it extracted all of this automatically for me, and executed this on this infrastructure. So what this helps me is, for example, I can go and say at a future date, I can go and search and say, show me all the experiment where I used O2, and then it returns all those experiments, for example, where I used where I had O2 in my formula, and so on. So there are other such parameters like that. So these are obviously very specific, science-specific parts. But we could, the key thing here to say is there are two workflows. One is the job submission, and one is very data or domain specific where the parsers could be integrated. And that slowly will now introduce us to, okay, the Airavata data infrastructure side of things, where when you extract these data sets, now you need a scalable ways to catalog all those metadata. Because when we are extracting and depositing these data sets, sometimes we know what the user's queries will be, sometimes we don't. So how do we do that will be those data catalog demos or tutorials I'll point to later. So let me pause here. Any questions? Anyone trying to follow along has issues? Again, please give feedback, please. Like, if this is too high level or too, so I'm jumping too much, we'll try to adapt. So as an example here, so what you've seen in tests, I'll slowly be talking through. Again, I'm not making sense anywhere, like please stop me. So what you've seen out of the box is an example. What you get out of the box is always the gateway, what you use potentially, or you can use to do this tutorial. And CGrid as an example, a heavily used computational chemistry infrastructure, which burns like usage from a computational allocation standpoint, exceed SU standpoint. It burns quite a bit of users, like helping users across the country and more run computational chemistry on various applications, like in these fields. So CGrid is essentially the test drive, what came out of the box with some customizations, with very minimal customizations on the look and feel. And then there are tutorials. Again, if you are all of this documentation, Anthony rightly said, we have too many links there in the document, but some of those links will help guide you on how to do this. For example, excuse me, it will help you. How do you take out of the box gateway and do these customizations? Like, how do you do? And sometimes you may have to write code to write your HTML, but also it has this graphical built-in, not the best CMS we know of, but like, that's what the Django, one of the best we could find in the Django ecosystem. So it has a content management system which will allow you to add pages and customize this. And this is how, like, what the evolution was from this test drive out of the box to CGrid. So there are two customizations here. I'm trying to slowly introduce them. So a gateway could be checked out of the box, like test drive, deploy it on your own domain. Like in this case, Sudhakar Pamidighantam, who is the PI of this gateway, has a domain cgrid.org, or it could be another institutional domain. It deploys that and uses the CMS to customize the look and feel to give users what they're expected to do and so on. And it has the standard things, what it integrates with, the same security infrastructure and so on. Once he customizes the look and feel as a gateway administrator, so what we will do is, so we will get this checked. So we have a double redirect going on. So what Sudhakar as a PI or his delegated administrators, what they will be doing is each gateway adds their own science interface. So in this case, we'll see quite a bit of chemistry and other related fields. You'll see some engineering applications as well and so on. So the gateway administrator adds these applications to the gateway. So the gateway comes with this authentication and integration to various computational resources, but each applications are added by the gateway administrator. So you can bring off, for example, an application here, and each of them can be, the inputs could be customized to as simple as drag drop or to more detail. Again, there is documentation link to follow along. So how you would where you can first example, go into very detailed. Once you run the Gaussian job, which is an entire example, we looked at it, and it has a small documentation, small exercise here. Here, how you would take an existing input, like instead of drag drop, maybe give a little more, like example, like adding booleans, like how to do those, or like how to pass arguments, and so on. It will provide instructions from very simple, like making some simple changes to slowly it will increase the complexity that and how to add, for example, other UI components. Which has some JSON field there for those inputs, and how certain checkboxes could be added, some validations could be added, more again, checkboxes or radio buttons could be added, and so on. And if those simple customizations are not sufficient, and there are some advanced gateways which we'll go into here, we will build from there on, you could add your own input file. In the case of a Gaussian one, which has a simple text editor, you just drag drop a text file. So these instructions provide how to customize the inputs and also the outputs also. So here, I'm just clicking these links. Again, all these links are available from the tutorial documentation. If you cannot find them, please talk to us. So these instructions, I'm just providing pointers here and show how you can write a little bit of a code and make an Django app and customize it heavily. And I will quickly show an example of that. InteractWell provides is a little bit of it'll take an effort. I'm slowly trying to say what you get out of the box is test drive, a little bit customizations you'll get you to C grade, and a little more like a graduate student work for a semester. For let's say we'll get you to, as an example, where InteractWell or some of the other gateways I can provide pointers to examples. So this one, InteractWell here is a collaboration from led at Oregon State University between the civil engineering and social scientists and hydrologists and so on. So it's solving the problem of how you would develop a decision-made support system for the food, energy, and water sectors. So what's this interesting about this is, so the users of this gateway are not classical computational scientists, but decision makers. They could be county resiliency administrator who are making a decision on should I let a mall be taken off and put a wetland come there, or the opposite. So if we let a farmland be go away, a big construction come in there, or should I let the energy company draw more power, and so on. So the community for this, like as we see here, is we see an advanced users here who will need to do the computation, who will need to take this usage from the food, energy, and water sector, model them using SWAT and other computational modeling tool, make that available to a larger community of users here. So for example, if I'm an administrator, I would not want to see an interface to if I'm a computational scientist, it has these classic interfaces, what we have seen in SIGGRADE, how we've seen how to run a Gaussian, you can see how to run a SWAT model or how to provide this interface. Alternatively, using the Custos fine-grained security, it has an interface where the prior machine learning workflows have been done, and now I'm interacting with the prior computations. So the SWAT model computation was done on the HPC-like infrastructure. Machine learning pipelines have been run on those models and extracted analysis, and they are stored in the metadata catalog, Airavata's a version of the Airavata's metadata catalog. And now I'm a user, I'm just doing the analysis of it. I'm skipping the computation portion, I'm skipping the data parsing portion that's done by experts. Now I'm coming in with a goal of, as a user, I would like to see how can I improve surface water quality, or a simple use case. I'm specifying the goals here. I'm specifying the river basin here, which I'm interacting with. And again, I'm going with some detailed tasks here, what I would like to do on these interconnected problems. And in the end, what we'll get out of is various plans on what to do and what level I can allow the water to be drawn or other changes to be done. So all of this, the computational modeling has been done, the machine learning pipelines have been done. I'm just doing the analysis part of it. So this is again completely built on the Airavata frameworks, these kind of fine-grained authorizations enabled by the Custos, and these look and feels of this, how do you develop the apps have been coming from the Django framework, and the data is provided in the data infrastructure. Okay, let me pause, take a big pause here. I think there's a lot, and I want to switch topics, but any questions, please? Like to be this interactive? Any thoughts, questions up until what you've been saying so far? If you tried along, please jump in, sharing your experiences. So the last piece of the puzzle, like which I was trying to share here, like I skipped over on piece. So we touched upon the briefly virtual cluster, didn't do a hands-on there, but we've seen at least how integration works, and then the execution, at least a demo you have seen if you didn't follow along the tutorial, and some security. But let me briefly preview some of these data infrastructures as well. So the basic goal here is like why we kind of the Airavata got evolved into various things here is we've been trying to, as I said, trying to describe our motivation. We've been trying to take a look at the typical research workflows and how and then how can we potentially create a continuum. So we have we need to go to the other extreme on like helping all the way from bridging the laptops, but like what we've been helping from is how do we help with the gateway aspects and to the infrastructure where users or administrators can bring in their own storages, computing. So we are not providing the computing or storages for the entire community, but rather what we are providing for the national community is an integration software and services, which they can bring in and integrate with their own storages and compute, whether it's on-premise or the national infrastructure or the clouds. How they would integrate and then bring their favorite applications. The applications could be and are increasingly becomes notebooks, Jupyter-like notebooks. How can you bring those notebooks, author them, and share them with the community, and then do this in a controlled fashion, and hopefully build larger scientific collaborations with them. And each of these, we believe, there is no one size. We should not champion for a one size fits all, but rather let these science use cases evolve a lot and the infrastructure evolve a lot. And then how can Airavata keep bridging them and integrating them is what we aspire towards. So if in case, again, the tutorial didn't clearly indicate, so what you could do is the takeaway here is, you could if you have a science goal in mind, and have I have a C-grid-like gateway I would like to develop. I have an infrastructure. I have an allocation on an exceed or a path. I would like to build a gateway. So that you could have a goal like that, and you could build. Or you have a goal like interact well. I have this big computational model, but I need to serve a community which is a little bit far removed, and I would like them not to necessarily have the expertise, just analyze the data. And if you have a goal like that, Airavata has pieces, different pieces which could be which are integrated based on those use cases and build a gateway and be customized. And we do host that. And Apache Airavata is an open source software. Custos has also open source software. At Indiana University, we run this as services. For now, if you want to do a test drive, you can somehow request Eroma, Abeysinghe, make a request and say, I would like to try this. Okay, bring me give me this all-in-one gateway like the test drive, or give me a Custos tenant, or give me based on your use case, you can do a test drive of some of these by talking to the hosted services. We'll be happy to create a pilot project, spin off and let you experiment with it for a while before you figure out what you'd like to do with it. And so that's the kind of the takeaway there. So let me jump ahead on the interactable portion. And also I'll skip out the UX portion. Let me jump into some data use cases as an example. So I skipped over some large problems. So for example, Custos is trying to demonstrate or at least trying to talk through how it could be used outside of this typical classic science gateway. So where you could use it to, for example, to develop a learning management system which has authorization need. Similarly, there are other pieces in Airavata we've been using. For example, we have a piece in it called Manage File Transfers. And we are trying to take that and then now helping the NASA Marshall Research Center, and the European Space Agency, and they would like to synchronize data, for example. So here the use case here is the Landsat, again, just to give you a quick science problem here, the Landsat, there are two types of Sentinel satellites, one operated by the NASA, the other operated by the European Space Agency. They both collectively cover the entire globe, but like, they do the respective halves. And now those data sets need to be combined and then walk through and be fed into the machine learning pipelines which run on AWS, and to provide, which will collectively at the end of those pipelines, comes out the HLS products, which will have the global coverage now combining with these both satellite observation system. The challenge here is these satellites spit out large amounts of data. And in this case, when we were looking into doing a pilot project, evaluating what can we do with various open source data transfers, which can do it efficiently. In this case, the NASA had to synchronize about 6 petabytes of data from Europe, and the European side has to similarly do this. So a simple example is how the components evolve in Apache Airavata, and then slowly others bake it. For example, how can we use MFT had built-in pieces, for example, to do optimized transfers. It has this MFT service, which we've seen in some of the use cases. How can you download data without having to be hosted at the same server as portal server? How can the data be there completely on where the data is stored or computed, and be directly served to the users with some control connections, which is the dotted paths are indicating. So minimize the data transfer path, but get those data to the user's laptop or to other destination. So that's been the kind of a goal of the MFT. Again, a paper is linked from the wiki. Feel free to read about it if, like Custos, if you're interested in the MFT piece. So in this case, the NASA use case we're trying to serve here is, MFTs will be integrated, is being integrated, is a work in progress project with an Apache Airflow. Apache Airflow, if you don't know about it, you can think about like cron on steroids. It's essentially a cron, which each of those tasks could be Python adapters, and you can fine-grainedly control and view those. So to synchronize those data sets, you now deploy that Airflow, and then and integrate with managed file transfer. So this is kind of I'm also using this example to show how some capabilities come into Airavata. The managed file transfer so far was always invoked by the Helix and other pipelines, and there are other instrument gateways I'll talk through. But as this example, the NASA champions this, how can I use this with Airflow? And this slowly, we try to get those contributions from the community through the Google Summer of Code. It initially comes in and over time matures, and our research software engineers stabilize it and make it. Then we will have now, hopefully a year from now, production-ready Airflow integration into Airavata, and now it can potentially open up door to other use cases. So that's kind of the path. So so what Airflow integrates here is, I'll try to show now that once the data is moved, it puts into a catalog. So I'll quickly switch gears and then show an example here. I'll stop after this. I've been bombarding with a lot of information and doing context switching too much. So let me quickly go to this last one and then stop that, and based on question, we'll be happy to answer. So we have a list of all the gateways. We kind of operate listed from here. So, here is an example. So here is the last example I'll try to stop at. In campuses, we feel through various MRI grants and so on, we often find these instruments come in. Now those instruments, as those spit out the experiment, not the computational experiment, what as users observe on them and provide those on this, they observe on this microscope, those data sets need to be distributed and potentially made available for computing. So as you see this in the Airavata pieces, we already touched upon that. The Seagrid had a data parser. So InteractWell was using this once the parse out data and then providing analytics capability. Here is how our life cycle goes. We typically take a gateway like this and now pull those together so that I will log in as a new university, as a researcher. And what I'll see now here is a data set I observed on an instrument. And for example, if I go into this detail, I can download this. Again, it's using these datasets are large. So they are hosted on a central university storage archive. They are not listed on this portal server. So it uses the MFT. Some of these are described in the paper. So, and directly when I click on it, download, it directly sends a signal into the MFT agent, and directly it has a HTTP proxy to download it to my laptop. So this way we can provide access to large storages without necessarily having them all mounted. And from the user standpoint, now they can share these data sets or look at the metadata coming from those. Some of these data sets, and as they are parsed out, as more data sets is available, you'll see this. And then some of the Airavata components can help here using custos to do fine-grained here sharing aspects on how I can share these collections, or the data parser framework to run an automatic pipeline to parse data as it ingests, or metadata pieces to store and make them available for queries. The last one being MFT services, like allowing these to be moved, the large data sets be moved across the infrastructure. So let me stop here. Again, that's a lot of information and a lot of context I switched. Please give feedback and ask questions, please. I see one question. Okay, is MFT a third-party transfer agent and Airflow is orchestrator? Airavata use Globus or third-party transfer and orchestration? Yes. As an example, since I'll read that question by following the. And share my screen back and share. All of these are open source. Again, that's the key thing here to take home. For example, you'll feel free to look into the MFT paper, or if you're more of a code person, you would like to see how Airavata could use, like I'm starting to provide. For example, it has various transports. Again, for this one, we didn't have Globus. We had Globus support at various times in other pieces, but looks like it didn't make it into the MFT part yet. But there are these transport. This how it has an abstraction and a transport could be added. A Globus and could be added here. So MFT is again, as Airavata evolves, we'll be trying to extract these pieces so that they can be used standalone and could be integrated as well. So MFT is one of those things. Custos is an example. So we need to pull all the pieces. Right now, the SCP and S3 are the heavily used one. We need to robot other transports and all add other pieces. So that's one piece. And then to answer your question on the orchestrators, Airflow. So for example, Airavata in various pieces have its own orchestrator. For example, for the computation, it has an execution orchestrator. It has some inbuilt data orchestrator, but this is an example how Airavata has evolved. So when a piece like Airflow comes in, which is very robust, if you look into where we invest time here is, Airavata has built-in orchestrators, but if you look into the Airflow community, here you'll see that it has over 2,000 contributors, and then a large segment of users. So when you have a project like this, when there is a large community, we call it a technical debt, that we have a similar piece and we'll try to retire it and replace it. It takes some. That's what we have mastered, the secret sauce of taking how can we take, I would not say secret, but specialized sauce of how can we take these widely used open source projects and integrate them, and slowly that way Airavata capabilities can keep growing. At the same time, we are not being liable for all the pieces, but we are standing behind a large community, standing in front of the large community here. So that's what the plan is. So right now the orchestrators are built in Airavata, but eventually we would like to see some of them being replaced by Airflow for orchestration purposes. So thanks for that question, Anthony, again. Yeah, Jacqueline, I think we hope these tutorials will stay forever, for a while. So we want to we are getting into this practice of they are getting buried into each conference. We'll try to make this so that anyone could do it. That's the whole point. That's our decision today on not doing hands-on, but rather give a bunch of takeaway tutorial notes so that you could do it at your own pace. So we try to hopefully maintain it persistently. If not, you will see those contacts there, Airavata mailing list contacts or our individual emails. So anytime drop us an email if you don't see anything there working. Again, thank you all for bearing with me. That's a lot of loaded information. Hopefully you'll have some take-home links, and Airavata has become a large project with all these things. So we choose this approach of giving a preview rather than like doing a very hands-on on one particular place. Without this, hopefully will give you an idea on what you can do with it. Anytime reach us out if you have any specific questions. With that, thank you. I'll turn it back to Luis.
Okay. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you for the tutorial. And with this, we finish this tutorial. Thank you to everyone for attending this tutorial. As Suresh said, please contact him or his team for any question you have. I think this topic is very huge, and you will have some time to play yourself with a tutorial, and then you will get a lot of questions. Myself, I did the same thing a couple of years ago, and we started getting into that. Okay, thank you. This kind of tutorial started me with getting into gateways. Okay, thank you very much, Suresh, again. And we will have a break now, and we will come back at 1 o'clock with the lightning talks. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice day. Goodbye.